Hi folks, in this video we're going to cover how energy and mass move through a food web. Now I'm going to draw this food web in a different way than you may have seen it before. We're not drawing each individual animal or species, we're actually drawing sort of a pyramid, and I'll explain how that works in just a second. But as we've done with food webs, down at the bottom are the producers. And so these are all the things that do photosynthesis. That's the key thing to notice here. We're talking our grasses, our shrubs, the trees, etc. If we go one level up, you have the things that eat them. These are our primary consumers. Above them are going to be your things that eat the grazers. So, your carnivores, omnivores, things like that, and so on up. You can have more than just these levels, but I'm just going to try to keep this relatively simple. So we go from producers to primary consumers, then secondary, then tertiary. And if these names, like the words primary, secondary, and tertiary, are hard to remember, don't worry. I'll always make sure to put the numbers there so you can see them. Okay, so what are we doing at each of these stages? Well, the producers are taking in both energy and matter via photosynthesis. So what we're going to do is, in this entire diagram, follow where the energy is coming from and where it's going to, and where the matter, the actual mass, stuff you can hold, where that's coming from and where it's going to. As you already know, photosynthesis takes in CO2 as its primary ingredient. There's also water, but a lot of the water just ends up as O2 up in the atmosphere. So in terms of mass, most of the mass that goes into making sugar comes from the CO2. So that's where the mass is coming from. And that's going to get turned into, you already know, glucose. And so the mass of the photosynthetic organism, for example, a tree, is getting larger as it takes in CO2 and turns it into first glucose and then into other carbs and lipids and proteins, nucleic acids, etc. So our term for today is biomass, and that just means all the stuff other than water that a living thing is made of. All the carbs, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids, etc. Okay, so that's the mass. The photosynthetic organism gains mass by taking in CO2. Now, we can measure that in lots of different ways, grams, kilograms, tons. It doesn't really matter which you choose. You'll see all sorts of versions in different examples. Now, this box, what it actually represents is not the total amount of trees by mass or even by energy. It's how much they are growing per year. And that's really important to see in these diagrams because the actual mass of a grassland is not that high. I mean, you might imagine in a field there's more mass of cows than there is grass. But over the course of the year, that grassland or the trees or whatever are growing more than the things that are eating them. So that's why this box is so large. It's the amount of growth per year. For example, the number of leaves you're putting on as a tree. Now, the energy, as you also already know, is coming from the sun. So this light energy is getting converted into chemical energy, and that's just the energy found within a chemical. So in the sugar, there's a certain amount of energy stored. And so the light energy is getting converted into chemical energy. And I want to put this up in the corner because we'll use it again. Just to remind you, biomass is just the stuff you're made of as a living thing. And we can also imagine that every one of these chemicals that we're made of is a type of energy, or at least stores energy. In terms of amounts, I'm just going to make up some numbers here. I'm just imagining some plant is absorbing 10 million joules of energy over some period of time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a day. And it is able to turn a certain amount of that into its own mass. So again, it's taking CO2 and light, and it's able to absorb and convert a certain amount into its own mass. Now, what's a little confusing here that I want to cover is it might have actually made more than 50,000 joules worth of chemical energy in sugar. It may have actually made twice as much, or 3 times that, or 5 times as much as that. But it didn't actually grow by that much. And this is, again, quite confusing. A plant might actually build enough stuff to make 100 leaves, but might only make 50. And the reason for that is it's always going to have to spend some of its glucose just to stay alive. And in previous unit, you learned that we do cellular respiration to recharge ATP. That lets us basically to just do all the things we need to stay alive. So what we need to see on this diagram is that these trees, shrubs, grasses are doing cellular respiration. They're not doing as much as photosynthesis, but they are doing some. So some percentage of the glucose they make is getting burned off. And that CO2 is lost, and the energy is lost as heat. In addition, a certain amount of the growth they make is actually lost to them as well, just in the form of dead leaves and twigs and branches that fall. And so there's a certain amount that just ends up leaving the tree or the shrub. Whatever's left, maybe it's 50 leaves that it's grown by, that is basically the budget for the next level of organisms. So if you grow by 50 leaves a year, then maybe the caterpillars and the birds and the various other insects and stuff can eat 50 leaves of you without harm to your organism long term. So you'll find, though, as I've drawn on this diagram, there's going to be less consumer growth even if they eat all 50,000 joules of energy, all right? Even if the caterpillars eat 50 leaves worth of mass, they aren't going to grow by 50 leaves worth. And the reason is, just like the trees, they are also burning some of their sugar to stay alive. And a lot of the food they eat, they just poop out because a lot of plant matter just isn't digestible to most organisms. So again, every time we jump a level, the next level up, which is called a trophic level, the next trophic level up will take in all of the energy and mass that's available, but a good portion of it is going to be lost and burned away using cellular respiration just to stay alive. And even before then, a whole lot of it is pooped out because it's undigestible. This will happen at each one of these levels. Now, what we haven't talked about is where all the poop and the dead leaves and all of that go to. And that's going to be a separate category off on the side. And these are the decomposers. And so they are going to actually take this as their primary food source. And then they're going to burn that to stay alive. And so all of our fungi, bacteria, and various other microbes are going to send all that stuff back into the atmosphere as CO2 again. And again, they're doing that with cellular respiration just to stay alive. Okay, let's put this all together and simplify this diagram. When we have organisms just surviving and perhaps eating the trophic level below them, some of the mass that they eat, some of the energy that they're absorbing is going to be lost as waste, as feces typically. Another portion of it is going to be lost just staying alive, recharging your ATP so that you can build, move, create whatever it is, breathe, all the stuff that you need to stay alive. Whatever's left over after you have pooped out some of your food and burned some of your food, whatever's left, well, that's your growth budget. That's how much you can grow by. In terms of percentages, this differs. For some organisms, you might poop out 40% of your food. That's not atypical. Others might also burn 50% of their food that they take in. Whatever's left over, and in this case 10%, might allow you to grow. So if you ate 10 kilograms of food, maybe you grow by 1 kilogram in this example. If you're a caterpillar, maybe you eat 100 grams of food and you grow by 17 grams. Now, don't memorize these percentages. A lot of textbooks will tell you there's a rule that you only grow by 10% of the energy that you absorb. And that's just not overall true. That's a way of estimating things. In reality, if you want to figure out your efficiency as an organism, a caterpillar is going to be way different than a hawk, which is going to be way different than a deer. Each organism has different efficiencies depending on what kind of food they're eating and how active they are. A cheetah has to spend a cheetah's not the best example, but has to spend a lot of energy in a very short period of time to run. A flying organism, like a hummingbird, massive percentage of its food intake is burned in cellular respiration. So it's hard for a hummingbird to grow because it's burning so much energy to fly and hover so much. So if you want to do this efficiency calculation, and this is something you'll all need to do, you take the amount of growth for that trophic level or that species and divide it by how much it ate, convert that to a percentage. That's the efficiency of the organism or the trophic level. Hope that helped, folks. We'll do some practice questions on this. See you next time.